Welcome to the Diversity Connector podcast, where we explore the rich tapestry of human experiences. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging, and together as we dive into conversations that bridge cultures, challenge stereotypes, and celebrate the unique perspectives each of us brings to the table. Each episode is a journey through stories and insights from a kaleidoscope of voices, each sharing their colorful narrative. Whether you're at home, on the go, or just anywhere in between, you're now part of a community that values understanding, inclusivity, and the beauty of diversity. So plug in your headphones, get comfortable, and let's connect through the power of our shared stories. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on the Diversity Connector podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Diversity Connector. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another fascinating woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, and share your story with us today.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be speaking to you today. My name's Nerina Di Lorenzo, and I'm speaking to you from Melbourne, on the land of the Wurundjeri people, who I pay my respects to. I think I'll start with, my background. As you can probably tell from my surname, I come from an Italian background, and I was brought up in a very traditional sort of Italian family background. My parents immigrated from Italy in the 1950s and started a new life in Australia. I was the youngest of 5 children, and it was a sort of beautiful upbringing full of some different challenges, but also some amazing role models in seeing what my parents did and how they followed their dreams and what they did in their life and the courage they brought with them. I always thought I would go into a creative field, maybe like art or graphic design, but I did well at maths and science, and at the very last minute, I discovered engineering, which at the time I thought about as another form of creativity. And I made a very late choice to do a double degree in civil engineering and business admin. Now, at the time, it was still a little bit unusual for women to be in engineering. It wasn't very common still at the time. And it was a little bit of a challenge in terms of people's understanding of engineering, including even for my family, being quite a traditional background. Even to the point where about a year after I started my engineering degree, I was walking with my mother and she said to me, "Tell me, Nerina, what really is this thing you're doing? What is engineering?" And I said to her, "Mum, don't worry, it's a good, clean job." And I explained it to her and she said, "Oh, thank God, I thought you were working under cars." So just that thing of, doing something in a different field, and just really recognising that can be a little bit of a challenge, but, there's a lot to be, I guess, learned and shared about those new things and those new fields that we're all in. So I completed my degrees and I went off to work for the oil rigs in the middle of the ocean in Bass Strait. Now I'll just paint this picture for you. Just imagine you're in the middle of the ocean, it's wild sea, and you're pretty much living on a structure that's just metal pipes, wiring. There's constantly a low hum. It smells of sort of salt. It's got this sort of metallic smell in the air. And, it's a really quite bit of a harsh environment. There's gases on the platform. You've got to be very careful about sparks and anything that can create explosions. It was a full-on experience. And usually I was the only woman on board. And sometimes when there was drilling happening, there might be even up to 50 men on board. And that was a really formative time and an important set of experiences for me. I learned some really important things. I spent a lot of time learning from the operations staff. I did a lot of listening. I did a lot of shadowing. I worked really, very closely with the people who operated the equipment. I did things like the night shift with them, and I really focused on learning and listening. And I noticed something very interesting. I noticed that engineers, when they went offshore, would often be viewed as a little bit maybe aloof, and sometimes didn't get much cooperation from the people who operated the machinery and the equipment. And what I found is being a bit unusual meant that there was a split second where a judgment hadn't been made about me. And so those early times spending, time listening and really connecting with people really meant that I had an opportunity that perhaps my colleagues were not afforded that same opportunity. And actually it meant that something quite different could happen. And the relationships that came from that and the ability to do our work together was quite incredible. So that was a really important sort of moment to really sort of not to be focusing so much on the unusualness of the situation, but really focusing on engaging with people as a pathway to, working out the best way to contribute and to be successful together. So that was a really fantastic experience. At the time, it was wonderful. I spent a number of years on the rigs, but I also found, and my language today would be that my values perhaps were a little bit out of alignment with the purpose of that business. And so I learned a lot, but I also felt maybe this wasn't going to be the forever place for me. And around that time, I accidentally got a job at my local council. So I went from a global enterprise to a hyper locally focused public sector organisation, which was really different. I thought I'd be there for maybe 3 years and then I'd try another sector, but I was bitten by the for-purpose bug, and I was seriously bitten by it. In my first week working at my local council, a resident drove a flock of sheep into the customer service centre because they were unhappy that they weren't permitted to keep more than one sheep on their residential property. And I remember going home that night and saying to my husband, this is really interesting. This is really interesting. And, it's a quirky story, but it tells you something about, the absolute humanness of public work and how connected that is with people that we care about. I spent time in business improvement. I moved into asset management and then moved into executive roles, which were focused on public infrastructure portfolios that included, looking after the road network, the drainage network, public buildings, all of our parks, waste, transport, recreation, and major construction projects. My last 5 years at local government were as the CEO of Marybeck Council, which was an incredible honour. And also during that time, I completed a PhD in barriers and enablers to implementing change in public sector organisations. I loved my time there, and it was through those roles that I became clearer about the way I wanted to lead and what kind of contribution I wanted to make. And I'll just tell you one story that illustrates that. During my time at Marybeck, it was very clear that the city was densifying and that we needed to really plan for more open space. But there was very limited means to buy land to create new parks. It was a very hard thing to do. We set a goal with council at the time to create 2 new parks by the end of the 4-year term. And that was a hard goal, and we didn't know how to achieve it, but we knew that those parks were needed for the future of our city as it densified, and they were needed in places where open space wouldn't be available. So we set this goal, and then I worked really closely with a group of people to start working a pathway. And over time, as different ideas started to be developed, people were able to take this project and start running with this. And this really magical thing happened where, teams of staff came up with new ways, ideas to actually get there. And to cut a long story short, by the end of that 4 years, we had managed to get not only 2 parks, but we bought land for 4 parks. And that program continues today, which I'm really, really proud of. And to me, it's an example of, setting a goal, getting clear about it, not worrying too much about how, worrying more about what should happen, and then just fostering people who will find magical ways to get there. So that brings me to today. I'm currently the Managing Director at Melbourne Water. I've been in this role for 2 years, and I bring, I think, that philosophy that I spoke about into this role. This is a really, it's a special business. It looks after water, sewage, waterways, and drainage for the city. And it looks after really 5 million people who I care about. And so in this role, we've set some goals that are really about recognising the transition that we need to make as a result of, or being ready, proactive, when we think about things like climate change and its impact on essential services like water. And I feel very honoured to be able to take this role up. And similarly, we have set some goals that will help us navigate this next 5 years. So my ongoing hope now is to be able to provide those essential services, hopefully be a good ancestor, and have a decent workplace where people belong. So I think that's sort of where I'm up to.
Oh, what an incredible journey you've had. It's fascinating to listen to you speak. You started off in an engineering world when there were very, very few women who were even given the opportunity to do what you managed to achieve. What would that have been like at that time as the only woman in that environment?
It was a combination of some challenges and also some amazing opportunities. And that the comment earlier about really connecting with people and building a human relationship was an important pathway to maybe avoiding being judged in a different way. So, at the time, it was mostly male and the engineers were male. I was a bit unusual as a female engineer. It gave me just a split second to relate a little bit differently than what people would have assumed about me when I went offshore. But it all, I think, hinged on building human relationships. And there were other times where it was a bit intimidating to sometimes be the only woman in on a platform of 50 men. It was sometimes intimidating. But even in those moments, having, I think, good, real human connections helped me, because it helped me then, I guess, maybe be able to operate in a way that was maybe less anxious about it, because then I started to have people who I could relate to, and we were able to move into it in a different place, relating as humans with each other. So I think that was a really big learning for me. But there were moments where I had to hold that and just go, I feel very anxious in this moment, but it's okay. Just breathe deeply and keep reaching out, keep trying to make relationships.
That's awesome. So how do you integrate diversity and inclusion principles into your leadership approach at Melbourne Water, especially in managing services for nearly 5 million people?
Well, we have a really strong ethos of being a workplace that values diversity, a really strong ethos, and that's been present at Melbourne Water for a long time before I was in this role.
Wow.
And in this role, what I've seen with our staff and what our team has also done, and our leadership team and some really incredible staff members who have been actively thinking about, well, what are the next places we want to take, diversity and inclusion, has been the development of a really inspirational piece of work called the Belonging Framework, which is really broadening our lenses on belonging in all forms and thinking about lots of different lived experiences and creating networks and allies that allow much more connection between the range of different lived experiences of people within our business. So we've got a really strong ethos, and part of it is also knowing that we reflect our community. And so in our hiring practices and in our thinking around the way we recruit, we encompass that as well, because we want our business to reflect as much as we can what is in society as well, because we think that means we'll be most able to relate. So really strong ethos at Melbourne Water, and it's really underpinned by a really strong set of values and a strong desire to serve and to do that well and to collaborate well together for the public.
I love that. So what challenges have you faced in ensuring diverse representation within the workforce of Melbourne Water, and how have you addressed them?
So I think that the one that was probably the most visible is the issue of gender diversity, particularly in highly technical fields, in the engineering fields, and in the operations as well. And over the last, I would say maybe 5 years, we've seen a progressive balancing. So at the moment, we have around a 60-40 split in terms of female representation in the business, which is quite healthy. It's different in different parts of the business, and we are continuing to focus on the operations, where it's more like a 32% percentage of women in our operations team. But we've just been progressively working on that, and really working on what kinds of networks support people when they come into the business, because not just the traction, it's also retention, and it's also making sure that culturally it's a good experience as well. And I think that's a gateway to all sorts of lived experience. Thinking that way is a great lens for lots of different lived experiences as well.
So in what ways has focusing on diversity within your team impacted the delivery of essential services like drinking water, sewage treatment, and drainage or flood mitigation?
I think it's brought more breadth to the way we think about our services. So, for example, a very traditional way to think about essential services is really pumps and pipes, thinking about water and sewage as their own sort of streams. I think a more diverse workforce with more diverse thinking styles as well, different ways of thinking that have been brought into the business, I think has brought more of a breadth to thinking about how traditional services connect with the whole water cycle, how that connects with waterways, how that connects with biodiversity, the links between the type of decisions we make in water supply and water in rivers, what that means in terms of the ecology around us. And so, a diverse way of thinking, I think, has brought in a broader way of thinking about our services. And the other piece that I just want to put in here is, we're also, one of our goals has been to walk country together with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And what that's bringing in the way we think about our services is much stronger connection with land and country, and recognising the connection between water and land, and thinking about it not just as the water that comes out of your taps, but also what is the ecology and what are rivers saying to us, as much as what are we saying about the way the water system should work. And in fact, I'll quote a fantastic elder from the Wurundjeri, Uncle Dave, who often says, ask a different question. Ask yourself, what is the waterway telling you? And I thought that was a beautiful, short sort of little phrase that I hold in my mind every so often, just to go, actually keep remembering that you've got to connect with an environment and ask that different question. And so that's a beautiful example. Diverse, connecting and building greater inclusion and diverse thinking styles has meant that we think differently about our services.
I love that. So can you discuss any specific initiatives that Melbourne Waters has undertaken under your leadership to promote inclusion and diversity within the organization?
During my time, so prior to this role, I had stepped across in an executive role that looked after our services and our operations. And during that time, we had a number of initiatives that were all about digging more deeply into the experience of psychological safety and cultural safety for people in work groups. We have lots of work groups that work remotely, and so we spent quite a bit of time with our work groups and our team leaders to just give ourselves a space to talk about what the experience could feel like if you are entering a work group that's maybe made up differently to your lived experience and what that feels like. And it was very interesting because what we learned was a real hunger to talk about, changes in language, to talk about, how do we talk about some of these things? What's the right sort of language to use? There was a hunger to even open the discussion up. And that was a couple of years ago as one particular initiative. But on an ongoing basis, our new belonging framework and the creation of ally groups is really the next step that's been led, beautifully by our staff.
That's awesome. So how do you ensure the success of diverse and inclusion efforts in Melbourne Waters, and what has been some notable achievements that you can share?
Yeah. I think for starters, when we look at our top two levels, our whole senior leadership team, we're now at 50-50. So that is a marked, that is visible.
It's big.
That is a marked difference from, that's a real step forward. So that's one example. I think we see it also in our engagement feedback. So we do a survey every year, and one of the highest areas that we score in, it's in the 90s, is that Melbourne Water values diversity and inclusion. So there's over 90% of our people are saying, yeah, we see that Melbourne Water values that. Now, to me, that means people are seeing that present in their work. That means that people understand and know the value that we place. So, I mean, they're two very visible, measurable things that I can point to. And that last score was only a couple of months ago. So I think that's I'm very personally proud of that and proud of the work of our whole team in embracing that.
That's awesome. So how does Melbourne Water engage with Melbourne's diverse communities to ensure that their needs are met in waterway management and other services?
So we have, and this again has been a growing area of practice, we have a really strong focus on community engagement. We do lots of construction projects in the community. We do projects on waterways, which are really big opportunities to engage local communities. And we provide important information on things like flood. One of the things that we do and that we focus on is particularly different language groups, tailoring information to different language groups, and also a focus on language that doesn't, this is a technical organisation, and really focusing on language that's accessible more broadly. And we've also got dedicated resources that are, take on engagement for us so that we can have people in the field able to be working with communities and friends groups and local groupings as we complete projects, and also lots of consultation prior to projects starting. And in particular, that focus on language as one of the key areas where we can see a barrier can arise even before you start if your information is not accessible in a language that a person, can connect with.
Wow. So reflecting on recent global challenges, how has your commitment to diversity influenced Melbourne Water's response to crisis, such as the COVID-19 pandemic or natural disasters?
I think it's meant that our people have thought much more about the way some of those large global events could impact differently for different cohorts. It's I think a recognition that it's not homogenous. Society is not homogenous, and actually we have to pay much more attention to cohorts who may have less access to resources. And so, COVID is an example where at Melbourne Water, the response, I think, was a really supportive response, really strongly focused on employee wellbeing, and also recognising a lot of difference in what worked for people and how they engaged through COVID. And I think what I see carrying forward, and there's been a focus here on what's been called the new ways of working, which has been taking those great lessons from during COVID time and then really applying that in the way we run our workforce on an ongoing basis. That encompasses flexibility and recognises there are lots of different needs. And I think that comes from having an appreciation of diversity, because you recognise that it's not homogenous, and that we need to actually ask the question that is about the person's experience rather than here is the blanket way. So I really see that lesson, flowing into the way we do our work.
Okay. So looking ahead, what are your future goals for enhancing diversity and inclusion in Melbourne Water, and how do you plan to achieve them?
I would like to see the continued gender balance trend just continuing to work its way forward in particularly our most technical areas. I would really like to see, and we have programs which support overseas engineers to come across and to work at Melbourne Water. I'd like to see the continuing of that, and also the strengthening of that, because we can bring new capability into our business. And so, I would like to see those continue. And I'd also like to, at some point in a few years' time, I'd love to look back on this new belonging framework and have a sense of how that has strengthened our culture, not just whether people appreciate diversity and inclusion, but how people have appreciated belonging to building culture, culture generically in the business, and how they engage with our business. A few years' time, I'd love to be able to look back at that and go, belonging, that real focus on belonging was a critical piece that moved our culture forward and built something into our ongoing culture. They're the three things I'd love to see.
Oh, that's fantastic. So based on your experience, what advice would you give other leaders in essential service sectors looking to improve diversity and inclusion within their organizations?
I think it's to spend as much time as you can exploring and listening, and being exposed to different lived experience, and to know that never ends. You've never kind of gone, oh yeah, I get it. I think there's always, we are still learning in the diversity and inclusion space. We're learning about intersectionality and what that means. That's early. It wasn't so much the discussion 5 years ago, but that's a learning that's happening societally. So I think the advice would be to continue being connected with different forms of lived experience, continue exposing yourself to those things, because we will be all learning. We're still learning, I think, in the space. That would be the main advice.
So what has Melbourne Water done to incorporate hiring people with neurodiversity, for example? Have you changed anything in terms of the layout of your offices, the infrastructure, taking those kind of people into consideration, or any other disabilities?
Yes. So there was a program actually a number of years ago that was particularly targeting the types of office and layout changes that would make this a more accessible workplace for a range of different physical or neurological lived experience. And it was really, it was even simple things like thinking about your access from, car parking or transport to offices. So if we had places where it was all gravelly, well, that's not necessarily going to be a friendly place if you have a different set of physical needs. And so it didn't have to be, it wasn't sort of rocket science, the type of thinking that happened. It was just having a lens and then looking at our facilities with that lens. And so there are still works that continue under that program. It's again, slowly work our way through. And again, we also learn when we have new employees with different forms of physical lived experience. That's also an opportunity to learn and to then say, and we spend quite a bit of time thinking about working with new employees about what their needs might be if there are different physical needs. So that's an ongoing learning that we will always be on the journey.
Fantastic. So the last question for this interview is, what personally motivates you to advocate for diversity and inclusion within Melbourne Waters and the broader water management sector?
Well, we're in a time of change. We know our sector will change. We know climate change is here. We know we've got lots of work to do in this coming decade to really set ourselves up proactively, and we can do it. But that can only happen if we are prepared to have a much broader way of thinking. And to me, diversity is at the heart of that. To me, that is actually how you get the answers to these next complex questions, is diversity in thinking styles, diversity in experience, and really being able to engage in a much deeper way. That, to me, is how we'll get the answers to these next curly questions. And I'm absolutely committed to that. That's something that I would like to see.
Fantastic. Well, this has been an inspiring interview. It's just fascinating what you've managed to do in this space and your time in the profession of engineering. Thank you so much for coming to share your story with us today.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to speak to you. Thanks so much.
And thank you to everybody who's tuned in today. The Diversity Connector is bringing you a diverse range of stories, voices from people from all over the world, sharing in our diversity and celebrating our differences. So come back again tomorrow when I interview yet another amazing guest. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world, and bye for now. Thanks again for the interview. And that's a wrap, everybody, on today's episode of the Diversity Connector podcast. Thank you for tuning in and being part of our vibrant and global conversation. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a tapestry of diverse perspectives. Remember, every story you've heard today is a thread in the larger fabric of our shared humanity. So, as you step back into your world, carry these stories with you and let them inspire you to embrace and celebrate the rich diversity around us. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these inspiring stories with more listeners. Do follow us on social media by looking for the Diversity Connector podcast for more updates. Until then, keep connecting, keep listening, and keep celebrating the beauty of diversity. This is the Diversity Connector podcast signing off. Stay curious, stay open, and definitely stay connected.